Hey, Charles.
How's it going?
Yeah, it's good.
Good?
It's good.
Great. Well, so going to have a conversation about ESKA and artist industry. So thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
And we've been having some interesting conversations.
We've been having some great conversations.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I wanted to just introduce you a little bit and set the scene, and please feel free to kind of jump in with any points. But, well, actually, to start with an anecdote. So I first started working with you in 2001, but we only met very recently, well, in recent years, because I was working at Virgin Records in the early noughties, late 90s, and I worked in the dance department. And they signed, a guy called Steve Brown signed New Sector Movements.
Oh, my goodness.
And IG Culture. And I should have brought it in, but I have the No Tricks EP.
Oh, my goodness.
Which I think was only on CD, actually, at the time, if I remember rightly. Which you featured on. And I think you featured on the album.
Yeah.
Very elaborately packaged.
Yeah.
Beautiful album.
It was a gorgeous looking.
Yeah.
Gorgeous looking piece of vinyl.
It was, yeah. So I guess the sort of early broken beat scene.
Yes.
So I first became aware of you as a singer within that environment, and sort of, I guess, people like Seiji and Bugs in the Attic and all of that, the Co-op,
Co-op
the CDR night and stuff like that was happening in London at the time, and then obviously many years later, started working together through Simon, your former manager. So, but I guess all of that to say you've had a very rich artist career, and not just for your own recorded music, but working with many other artists of many different genres and disciplines.
Yeah.
Which it takes us to the album title that we'll touch on a little bit as well. But over a couple of decades plus. Do you want to name some of the artists you've worked with and some highlights? Does that put you on the spot?
Well, I guess starting from my first recording, that would have been with a young band called Quite Sane, led by Anthony Tidd, bassist and composer. And after he'd moved to Philadelphia, I started working. I joined the Lewis Taylor's band, ended up touring the world with him. But alongside that, I think it was also kind of the garage scene that was emerging. And so
when was this?
Collaborated. Gosh, this would have been the early 90s, really.
Yeah.
Stephen Emmanuel, and so I thought, okay, I'd give that a go. It was never really. I was never really thinking about the genre or, whatever style or scene. I think I was drawn to experimenting with just using these opportunities as they came to kind of really hone my musicianship. But also connection. I think it was always about connection for me, because I'll never forget when I entered Camden Palais on a garage night and seeing an ocean of people dancing to this style of music. I wasn't part of that scene or culture or anything like that. It wasn't really anything to do with that kind of affinity, but just to witness what music does to community and the communion around a particular style of music. I remember in tandem, drum and bass was going, emerged. And then there were people who were very much, I'm a drum and bass head. Yeah. There were some people, no, I'm a garage or a house head, And again, these were more than genres, they were communities.
Yes.
They were actually about the people.
Yeah.
And so that was what fascinated me, actually, what a particular style of music would open up in terms of the people that I would suddenly encounter, whether that be the producers or the writers or the singers, just stylistic variations, and community variations. You know, it was so exciting for me to be able to be given that open door to something. I came from a classical gospel church background. I was just a green, naive kid, just kind of wanting to just take it all in and be involved and be connected to these different groups of people. So I think that was what was inspiring for me, and what was the motivation for wanting to explore different types of music, as well as actually the way in which I could see it was shaping my voice, my sound, my ears, my sense of composition, all of these things that I felt that, you know, I just was continually growing in. So yeah, it was quite a long journey of doing that, and I was just being a bit greedy, I think, you know.
I think one common thread when you look at your discography and sort of look at the sort of work you've done, the voice and arrangement of vocal is a common thread.
Right, yeah.
And there's, I think, the ability and the passion and enjoyment of being able to apply your instruments in a way to all different genres.
Such a thrill. Yeah. You know, such a thrill to me, because, you know, you work with someone and that, you know, in a genre you don't know anything about. And then you find, you know, say for example, you know, I'm thinking, okay, say if it was an R&B tune or something, then I'd go and study Brandy, and I'd go and study her vocals. I'd start listening to kind of how her construction, you know, to try and be as authentic as I can be in a particular style, or, you know, if it were, I don't know, whatever it was that came to me, I would then, for me, is an education. It was studying that style with respect to the vocals, in order to deliver the most authentic presentation of that style of music. For me, that was such a fun, thrilling challenge to give myself creatively, you know. Yeah. And I'm still addicted to doing that. Yeah.
Well, I think the community, as you kind of reference, which I think is a really interesting way to explore music through community and sort of, you know, the sort of tribes that exist. And
beautiful.
Yeah, if you go back to the 90s and early noughties, pre-digital, I suppose.
Yeah.
How people listened to music and discovered music was, you know, very much influenced by those communities, whether they were in the media and different magazines or different DJs, or just going out with your friends. And you'd experience different music, or you'd get sucked into the drum and bass world, or which I did actually, and I've taken from sort of house music into drum and bass when I moved to London, and that was a whole world to explore. So, but it's different today in the way that people explore and find music, and it's in a way more common today for people to listen to many different genres because they're very much, you know, available at their fingertips. So it's interesting how you discovered different genres through different communities, and being a musician and being able to apply your craft and learn craft in different areas and genres, which has, I guess, in part shaped the artist you are today. Yeah. Working with different types of artists who have different communities and genre sort of experiences. Yeah,
I think that's also something that's quite unique. Certainly my London experience, I mean, that's, I guess, what I can talk about predominantly. Being a London musician, or even being a British musician, that ironically, the scene isn't that big, the industry isn't that big that you can afford to necessarily play one type of thing and be in just one particular pocket. And so part of honing your craft is the ability to play lots of different styles of music, to be able to play alongside different kind of artists. I think in America, certainly from the bit that I've witnessed, you could delve into one particular style, and it's so big and so vast. Say if you're a jazz musician or something, you could just do that exclusively, and it's big enough. There's an industry big enough around that particular thing. It doesn't necessarily work that way in the UK in a similar way, and so I think that's possibly a reason why we have always ended up hybriding.
Yes. the fusion.
In a really interesting way, in
Yes.
an unusual ways, where suddenly jazz kind of steps in with hip hop, or suddenly you get, I don't know, like today you've got all jazz and then funk and then maybe fusing in another folk in there, and equally on the maybe not necessarily live music, or more studio produced music, a similar thing where people are kind of hybriding and feel like, okay, they're working across scenes.
Yes. The melting pot is I think something that London has always done well.
Brilliantly.
And a champion of yours, Giles Peterson, I think it's fair to say is someone who I think has fostered that very eclectic, esoteric, kind of quite uniquely UK sort of melting pot of genres.
Yeah.
But one thing I would sort of almost come back on that in terms of, I think, your artist career is that I think there is something in you as a trailblazer, in the sense that you are across and have worked in many different genres, and the industry still has a tendency to want to pigeonhole an artist.
Oh yeah.
Genres, the sort of construct of the industry to want to put you in a box is something that I think you've managed to try and sort of stay outside of that equation. But obviously releasing your own music again brings the focus back to that always.
Yeah.
There has to be a box. Yeah. Unfortunately.
Yeah.
To some extent. So I think it's part of the magic in what you do. And a segue into your album, The Ordinary Life of a Magic Woman, which is the album you've got forthcoming.
Yeah.
I think, well, my understanding is there's sort of metaphors within this a little bit, which touch on what I mean by you sort of trailblazing through different genres and being able to work with many different types of artists and appreciate different sounds, be involved in different, from sort of the more theatrical end to the nightclub and everything in between.
Yeah.
It is kind of quite a unique trajectory in many ways.
From concert hall to club. And back again, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. And I guess that informs how you as an artist, present your own music.
Yeah.
With this album sort of forthcoming, you're now coming back to the stage.
Yeah.
After a number of years from your debut album. So I was just interested to kind of get your take on, and what's your take on the album title and how that reflects your artistry and the sort of background.
The Ordinary Life of a Magic Woman. Creatively speaking, I mean, I think, first of all music is created. It's not created in a vacuum. There's a social, there's the social kind of commentary behind it. There's the political commentary behind it. It's a moment in time, and it's a document of a moment in time, a sonic document of a moment in time. And so I suppose when I think about when I arrived at the title for this project, I think it was lockdown.
Right.
And it was like a eureka. Yeah, it's called. Yeah, I'm going to own that. It's going to be called The Ordinary Life of a Magic Woman. When I was very much feeling just sort of us being in lockdown, I'm a home educator, trying to figure out what home learning is at home, literally, when suddenly all our home ed groups were not able to do our meetups anymore. And I'm observing my life with my daughter. It was also the season when I was thinking about my mortality, having had pneumonia twice prior to COVID, and my anxieties around health, and thinking about what it was that I wanted to pass over to my daughter, what my values were, trying to distill what was important, and amongst all of the other resistances that I have to push against with my being a creative, and trying to be thankful for the little things and observing the little things and the details of life that I felt were just as wonderful to celebrate as all this creative stuff, and that actually motherhood is about as magical as it gets. And realizing the magic woman is ESKA the mother, you know.
Yeah.
The magic woman makes all these ordinary, mundane things happen and function so that this artist, ESKA, can do her thing. But the magic is in actually observing that every day and loving it, really finding the beauty in it, in cooking a meal for the kid, and in thinking about that narrative, I suddenly found a way of, or I suddenly was starting to think, actually, it's about a merger of those two things. Why do I keep thinking that there's this life and then there's the other bit? Is there a way in which actually, because they have to work together, and I feel that that's a really important story and powerful story.
It's your work-life balance. Yeah, you're an entrepreneur.
Or my work-life imbalance, yeah. That, you know, and also the story of that being in middle age.
Yes.
The story of that being at this juncture in my life. What does it mean to be a creative at this point in my life, alongside being a mother too, you know?
Yeah. And I think that raises something that I'll often ask when we start working with an artist on a project is what does success look like?
I remember when you said that to me, Charles, because I think we'd only met a couple of times, and I thought, God, that's a big
question.
That's a big question. How are you know? And great question, because I don't think I answered it straight away. I had to go and think about that, and I was ruminating on it for several months actually, as we were starting to prepare to kind of work together on this record. I kept thinking, okay, Esk, so what does success look like when this record comes out? What's it going to be? Is it going to be the stats, wonderful stats?
Yeah, those Spotify listeners.
Yeah, is that going to? So you've had X number of listeners. Is that going to be success for you? Is it building your audience? And you know, I knew you threw some things back at me, just some suggestions, and actually, I realised for me what success would look like is actually if this record is a gateway to me being more prolific as a solo artist.
Yes,
that is success to me for this record, and actually that does make me realise the things that I shouldn't watch out for in terms of then measuring what success looks like.
Well, just to contextualise that, so your debut album, ESKA, was, you know, really successful critically and a real moment, I think, for you. And that was released in 2015.
10 years ago.
10 years ago.
Yeah.
Mercury-nominated, you know, recognised as a classic in its sort of genre by many people, and a really celebrated piece of work. But it's been 10 years.
Yeah.
So, and I think, you know, part of the, you know, in introducing you and you're working with many artists is to sort of explain a bit sort of all the things that you do. Aside that, but it struck me when you did answer the question in that way, and I remember you saying, well, I think you put it in a way that it was time now for you to focus on your music and your artistry as being kind of on the stage.
Yeah.
You've done, you know, many things with other artists on their stage in wonderful ways, and that I thought that was a really interesting insight and a great challenge for us as, you know, working with you to try and help that journey. But it really informs, I think, the work of trying to establish an artist business and sort of looking at this from this artist industry perspective, that, I like to sort of think of it that way in some ways, that you are a multi-dimensional business that isn't only releasing your own record, you're doing other things as well, and they've done many other things. So how does this success manifest and take from what you've done and sort of, allow that to help the record reach people and, and not be measured by the stats, which is unfortunately often the benchmark that we, hear. And it's not always necessarily the wrong thing to look at these stats and benchmarks, streaming numbers or chart positions that the industry, will focus on. They are a metric of consumption, after all. So there's a logic and a rationale within that, but it doesn't necessarily correlate with the artistry or the artistic goals, which have to be sustainable. So thus have to be sort of economically and business-wise sort of, successful. But there's a bigger picture, I guess, than just those stats and just that week one position, which is sort of interesting, and that perhaps takes us to how you are releasing this record. And one of the things we started to get into from that conversation was, maybe releasing music in a slightly different way, and releasing vinyl first, which I'm very pleased that you've embraced as an idea, and it seemed to strike a chord.
Yeah, well, I think, it feels like the Wild Wild West a little bit out there for musicians, artists like myself, putting out music. 10-year break from releasing solo music feels like I've just woken up and it's completely...
Much has changed.
I'm in a totally different world now, right? The way in which music's consumed, the way in which you reach your audience, all of that is completely changed. And there's a lot of frustration out there. It's palpable.
Yes.
That we're all saying the same thing. There doesn't seem to be money like there used to be. It doesn't seem to be, for the amount of work that you're putting in, the remuneration doesn't feel ethical. It doesn't feel right. Something's not working here. And I feel like, okay, we're all saying that, but what are we going to do about it is the question, for me, that, okay, we understand that. Everybody knows we're not receiving the remuneration that we feel we deserve. So what are we going to do? And not that I don't think there's necessarily just one solution. What I'm excited about is that anyone that's attempting to come at this situation with some sort of solution, which I feel is akin to, it feels like back in the mixtape days when people were, opening the back of the boot of their car, and selling their mixer, which musicians have always found a way. Artists have found a way. If we want to find our audience and we want to sell our music, there will be innovation that will be required that I think only musicians can come up with.
Totally.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so when you even suggested this whole concept of vinyl first, and actually it was your analogy of cinema.
Yes.
That you mentioned that cinema, the film industry releasing films first in cinema for a certain amount of time before it goes to digital. And you think, okay, that creative industry's figured that one out. That seems quite logical and quite basic as okay. So my brain went, that makes sense, surely, that there should be, if we had a moment where it exclusively was something that was tangible, you could have that you could hold the music again, you can buy the music again, then before it being released to digital, that might have some potential in addressing the remuneration issue. And also, it might have the potential to just bring value back to music. And what I like about it, what I liked about it, I mean, there's so many things that I liked about it. The idea was also that I felt empowered. It empowers me as a musician to have that kind of control. Because I actually feel that this is a musicians, the solution's going to come from musicians with this. And it's about musicians turning it around and valuing their work and the work of others enough to buy it.
Exactly, yeah.
No?
So a prop here, which unintendedly the hardback book is also, the book industry figured it out as well, because you release a hardback book before you let the Kindle happen.
Okay.
It's not why I bought this book with me.
No, I didn't know that that's what they do, actually.
They do, yeah. So they tend to release hardback books first.
Right.
So the people who are super keen to get the book buy the hardback. It's a little dearer, but if you want to collect the book, then happy to spend the money. And then the paperback and the Kindle, and then I guess the audiobook and stuff come out. And I assume, I don't know, but I assume that the writer earns less royalties from the audiobook and the Kindle than they do from the hardback. But I don't know. I'm not an authority.
Right.
But I wanted to read you a quote which I came across earlier this week, reading this book, which is called Mood Machine: The Rise of Spotify and the Cost of the Perfect Playlist. And it's a book about the rise of Spotify, and it's by this music journalist, Liz Pelly, American music journalist, who has witnessed and I think written about music consumption and music industry and music over the last decade, and witnessed some of the changes that have manifested as a result of streaming culture.
This is interesting.
And it will bring us back to vinyl. It's actually her quoting, I'm going to get it wrong again, Anoni. She's having a conversation with Anoni about music, and it's in a chapter that's titled "The Conquest of Chill." I'll read it to you and see if it sticks out. Anoni released her first full-length album in February 2000. Her first 3 decades in the industry have offered her an upfront view to 21st century tech power's corrupting influence on music's already quite corrupt economy. There used to be a system where harder music had a place within the pantheon of the economy of music, she told me. If we're going to just accept the economy of music for a second as a paradigm, within that, there were complex conversations happening. Even within capitalism, there were smaller economies, smaller worlds where smaller musicians were thriving, and people were able to support themselves selling complicated records. Records that you wouldn't listen to hundreds and hundreds of times. Losing the physical object of the record and instead leaning on monetization based on plays really upends the transaction between the songwriter and the listener. It is a very, very politically astute maneuver that favors a narcotic relationship to music over a complex, meditative relationship to music. It's quite a stark, but quite relatable, I think. And then she goes on, I'll just read this small paragraph. Before streaming, Anoni saw more opportunities for non-pop music. I'm not saying it was a noble economy, but there was more of an ecology to it. There were so many ways of approaching listening to a song. There was an innate integrity to paying a person for a record, whether you listened to it 5 times or 5,000 times. Sometimes a record only needed to be listened to 5 times in order for a profound transaction to have taken place.
Just
pertinent,
gorgeous.
Right?
Just gorgeous.
And I think we've lost sight of some of these things in how the transaction with music is playing out.
The art of listening.
Yes.
And actually the honouring of listening as a discrete happening, but that's also being eroded from us as a society.
Yeah.
It's funny, I recall an article talking about the impact of technology with children and the way in which they interact with music, because we're in the day when your kid has to go, Mum, can I borrow your phone to listen to music?
Yes.
I've had to buy the kid a vinyl player.
Same. Yes.
Because I didn't grow up asking my parents if I can listen to music. That's insane.
Yes.
It's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
And I just started getting disgusted by that. It's to do with this interface, that my child is being blocked. It's to do with this interface.
And the interface has its own problems because there's many other things on the interface. So it's,
That's the reason why. It's not actually because I don't want her to be listening to music.
Yes.
And that to even ask me permission to listen to music is just so wrong, you know. And I just wanted to get that out.
With my kids, I think it's a little bit older than yours, my daughter's 13, one of the positives in some ways of the way they can consume music now is that I think it's a positive and a negative, is that all music is available to them. Right. Period.
Okay.
Because it's all on the internet. So the discovery potential for the curious is wild. Yeah, it's absolutely wild. Yeah. Too much. I don't know how they navigate it from ground zero. How do you enter there? Because we all entered halfway in. Yeah. When it happened, we'd already had a past of non-digital
But although
music.
I have to say, Charles, I mean, from my little understanding of how it works is they start curating in school across with their phones. Do you know what I mean? So there's this sort of level of curation that happens among young people. It's inevitable.
Peer and community. Yes. Yeah.
Community again. Communion.
Yeah. So important.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think the passive nature of listening now on streaming platforms is, and Liz very eloquently talks about this in the book, and I think it's part of, I've only got halfway through, but it's part of the problem she's perhaps referring to, is that it erodes this relationship that we can have that hasn't gone away, but I think it comes back to what you were saying earlier about it is in the artist's control. Yeah. If they choose, if they are empowered, if they are allowed to take control of that relationship with the audience. How the music is presented to the audience doesn't have to be in a passive way. No. There are benefits to the reach, of course, of digitization, that, everyone in the world can hear the single that you last released, and pre-digital that wasn't possible. Yeah. So that's, there are positives clearly, but how you wrestle control back in that relationship, I think is something that we're looking to sort of ways and creative ways, I think are the way forwards, and they, I would agree with you, will come from the artist. Yeah. In many ways. So it's about, I think, trying to, enable that and, move away from, necessarily move away from prescribed ways of releasing things, because that's how the music industry, the record business, does things. It doesn't necessarily have to be how the artist industry does things. It's a choice.
And I really love the way in which you make that distinction, Charles, that there's a music industry and there's an artist industry, because actually, I think the first time I heard you say that, it something in me went, oh gosh, yeah, I'm in the artist industry. Mm-hmm. I don't have to watch the other bit. That's not my concern. I'll have my interactions with that side, and it'll be whatever it will be. But I still have a business to take care of. I still have my art to make. I still have to find a way in which to connect with my audience. That's in my hands. Yeah. It's nobody else's hands, and it's nobody else's business. It's my business. Yes. So again, that actually excites me, ignites me, and fires me up to think, okay, I've got to find a way. I've got to try. I've got to experiment, try new ways of doing things in order to achieve that. Make this a successful business. For myself, for my family. Yeah. Etc.
Well, and quantify and qualify what success means.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be a number on a technology platform.
Yeah.
Of course, that's a reference point, and we, we shouldn't ignore those things. But I think if that becomes success, in my experience, where it often is measured as the yardstick, it can often, I think, more times than not, lead to disappointment.
Yeah, I mean, look, I find myself, for all the successes of my debut record, for all intents and purposes, I've returned 10 years later. And I'm a new artist again.
Yes.
I haven't got flossy numbers, and and yet having created something that was recognised to have some sort of, kudos about it. The irony is it has no bearing on what I'm doing right now.
Yeah. Well, if you went to a digital distribution company and said, well, can you give me an advance? I'm a former Mercury-nominated, highly celebrated artist. They would look past all of the accolades and look at the last 12 months, 36 months of streaming and value based on that, which can't be the point of value for art and music. It just can't be.
It doesn't really quite make sense to me. I mean, I understand. I understand that, it has to trickle down to economics in the end, I guess, I suppose.
Yes.
But art has a value, full stop, and a great art should be celebrated just for being great art. I've not in any way feel that necessarily means that I might see the fullness of that in my lifetime. I'm not even, I know I don't need to watch that for me, again, because that's for what I've decided success is. I can't be looking for the numbers. I need to be able to make my art business work so that I can repeat. I can do this again.
Yes.
I can make again. I can make again.
Sustainability.
And that to sustain that, to be a creative is what I'm aiming for. That's my measure of success.
Yeah. And you are your own record label. So
I decided to do that. Yeah. And part of that was, it wasn't that, yeah, I'm a music mogul, all in from 100%. My kitchen, and I felt like I needed the best way to explain the kind of work that I do would have to be, I'm not going to be able to explain myself in one record. I'm not sure how many artists can.
No.
That was something that I've become really acutely aware of because of my genre hopping kind of career and my interests that go all over the place. It's going to take a bit of a journey to explain that over many records, I hope and pray, that I get to make.
Yeah. So there's a freedom there in how you can approach that.
The freedom to do that felt like that needed to be under my own moniker, because who else is going to best explain that?
It gives you some responsibilities, though, and you're not afraid of a spreadsheet or a budget and looking at the numbers, which, in terms of understanding that your P&L as a kind of record label boss is that's what being a record label is. And you're also self-managed, so you're in neck deep in the conversations. You're in deep. Yeah, and it's hard work, right?
It's hard work. It's definitely not for the faint-hearted. But I've got to say, it's when I think on it, hard work aside, it's actually really thrilling to me for the artist that I am. I enjoy being label and artist because I'll have to explain, I have a teaching background, and it might be that, but it's also probably my left hemisphere math background to some extent. I don't know, but I need to get under the bonnet of things. I need to know why. I need to know why does it work, or why doesn't it work, or where does that, and so why are you asking me this, Charles, and why does it, like even from one question that I remember, probably the first time I got irritated in the process was when I had to I was asked, okay, think of could you tell us the 4 genres that your album's gonna be categorized
Only
under. First of all, 4. Okay. And then I'm seeing the list is, it's not exactly, it's quite a reductive list as well.
That's the primary genre list.
Oh, right. Okay.
The secondary genre list is longer.
Oh, right. Okay.
But you have to get past the primary genre list.
So, I mean, all of this stuff that for me as an artist thinking, oh, right. So is this how my music gets, from all these musicians that played on it, from the mix engineers, the mastering, from all the artwork. In the end, it gets distilled into zeros and ones, funneled into the machine.
Yeah.
And suddenly the algorithm's doing this according to this. And actually, I want to know why. I want to know, how does that work and how does that serve me and my art and my making,
It's embracing it, though. You have to embrace.
You do, and
it's a reality, and there is a rationale behind it.
Yeah,
to help the consumer find the stuff that they want to find, for it to be algorithmically pointed in the right direction, and all those things. So there's a real importance, I think, in understanding it and being able to discuss. And there was a bit of heated
That's the thing,
back
right?
and forth on like what is this? And actually, then we realised that you can do it per song, which of course means that then you can look at each song.
Yeah, that was super fun.
Yeah.
I can't remember the website that you
Every Noise.
Yeah. What a brilliant website.
Yes.
Suddenly you can put in an artist's name.
Yes.
And then it whoever's done it, it's like 12 years of research,
it's a former Spotify employee.
I
actually learned just recently that I think he no longer works at Spotify, so it stopped in 2023. I believe.
Right.
So it's not being updated anymore.
Oh, that's a shame.
Which is a shame, yes.
Oh, but very useful.
It's quite a depository.
Kind of put in an artist, you think, okay, I wonder if I'm sort of similar, maybe the audience might be similar, and then you kind of get to see which genres the album has been put in, how it's been categorized. I found that very helpful. Yeah. But the other thing that I found really helpful was actually... when I was informed that actually, if you think about these genres, not about your music, they're not a classification of your music, it's a classification of audience.
Yes.
And suddenly that actually shifted my thinking. And also, you have to be, there's a pragmatism that goes with that.
Yes.
Okay, ESKA, where is your audience going to be?
Yeah. It's marketing.
Are you going to find them listening to... I don't know, easy listening. Are they going to, the easy listening listeners, are they going to be listening to this? And then suddenly, just flipping it around a little bit, not thinking, actually, this is not some slight on my music that you think it's supposed to be in this category, but actually, this is where my audience is to be found. Yeah. And you want to maximize on that, surely.
100%.
So let's just put it where people are going to listen to it, And then it made it a much easier job. But even that, me thinking from my artist perspective, how many artists understand that? Really, Charles?
Not
how
enough.
many understand that it's to help find your audience? It's not there to be a critique on your work and its worth or its genre merits or not. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So I find that in being the label as well as the artist, I get all this information that is incredibly helpful and again, incredibly empowering. And all these acronyms that you guys deal with, it's beyond me. I didn't even know what a DSP was before I, started working with you guys.
It's an important point, I think. So the industry doesn't, uses a lot of jargon. It uses a lot of jargon, acronyms, and that can exclude people who perhaps aren't having that conversation every day because they're talking about chord progressions, which you'd lose me quickly on that conversation, sadly. So I think, just being honest about that and saying, actually, I don't understand what you're talking about, and then being able to understand so you can participate, because it is ultimately about trying to make the music be successful on these platforms, so it can be empowering. And I think that's a perspective that's really, really valuable that you're sort of bringing. So, I really wish in many ways, and I guess that's why we're having this conversation, is for artists to feel more empowered in
in this conversation of, okay, how can you make your artist business a success?
Yes.
By your own definition
Yeah.
of success.
And that's a good segue to change lanes into selling your music, how an artist approaches selling their music. And what you made a comment in a recent conversation we had about the begging bowl that comes out in how, artists are, constantly being asked to post on social media and to share things, and it's a sort of endless task, which obviously has a place, but within that request there is often a demand or a request to buy my music, stream my music, pre-save my song, create something with my song, and this endless request to the consumer who possibly doesn't want to be asked by their favourite artist who they hold on a pedestal to see them with the begging bowl.
No.
And I think we should probably acknowledge that everyone knows how to press play on their favourite DSP by this stage, or they've still got a vinyl player and they know how to use that, right? So it was a quite striking comment, and it was great to hear it sort of being articulated by you, because I don't think it's something that's questioned enough necessarily.
I don't even know how we slipped into it, and it's a heartbreaking situation to me that mentality has crept in, that we as artists must be pleading with our audience, please buy, please, or please listen, please, 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 please. And the way in which that, we can feel trapped into doing that, and the way in which sometimes I feel we're encouraged to do that, that's sort of on the industry side.
Yes.
It feels like they don't mind us doing that. I mean, even in the way in which I think sometimes, I get the emails from the DSPs and they're, upload this. Why don't you do this? And why don't you do that? And why don't you do that? And it's like, okay, so I'm working for you now. Is that is this what's happening? I'm working for you. You want more images. You want more videos. You want more.
You're bringing people to their platform.
Essentially,
and
right?
The more users they have on their platform,
right,
the higher their share value.
Right.
So
right. Okay. So I'm working for them.
In some ways, that's the the technology industry has influenced the music industry, and
right.
I doubt there's a record label or distribution company who isn't guilty of reading the script from the retailer, from the DSP that says, here's your artist promotional card, here's your playlist that your artist can share, and effectively say, please stream my music. And by the way, stream everything else that's in this playlist as well that isn't mine.
Right.
And I wonder whether, we talk a lot about narrative when we talk about promoting music and trying to navigate, the work that is social media for artists to be heard and to cut through the noise that's deafening. And when you think about what's interesting in an artist's narrative, I can tell you what isn't interesting, and that is you asking me to buy your record. That's not interesting. Right? I don't need you to tell me that. I need to feel like I want to buy your record because I like what you're doing and what you're talking about artistically. That's what art's for. But I fear that artists are now spending a good percentage of their time in storytelling asking people to buy their music or stream their whatever, and it's an infectious disease that has been, I think, spread via technology businesses. Yeah. And art, in some ways, music is really about rebelling against such things.
Oh, the rebellions left the room a long time ago.
Yeah.
and rebel music left the room a long time ago.
Yeah,
that's really quite scary, to be honest with you.
We need more rebel music.
Isn't for that, my goodness, what is it for?
Exactly.
So and in a way, also the way in which artists engage with their audience, there's got to be some rebellion in there. There's got to be some defiance in there, surely, that isn't just about ending up feeling like you're begging away and you're making stuff for someone who tells you that this is what you have to. Since when is art making been about being told what to do? But we've kind of slipped into that stream, and an unhealthy place, I think, psychologically for art making, when you feel that way and you already feel subordinate to. You feel subordinate to a digital platform. That's insane.
Totally.
That's insane to feel subordinate to something that actually exists in cyberspace.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not
and sadly, the music industry, I think Lucian Grange kind of really, the head of Universal, really kind of came out batting for this point of the superfan and how we serve the superfan as the artist, which I think you can read between the lines there as well. Sell them something more, so you've got these super fans. Okay. So what do you do about it? You sell them more because they'll spend more money.
Right.
And super fans are great in the sense that they have passion for the artist. They therefore need to be treated with respect.
Yeah.
And not be rinsed. You know, and they don't necessarily need to be. You can make fabulous products that they might want to buy.
Right.
But the products should still represent the art.
Right.
And this is where the record business, obviously has a purpose here, is to package the music that you make and to be able to, exploit it commercially. That's the business. And there's nothing wrong with that in and of itself, I don't think. But because so many artists are now their own record labels and in charge of their own destiny, the messaging gets quite blurry, I think, in terms of, okay, what shall I do on social media?
Right, okay.
And if much of the noise is sell, stream, and that's where we should be focusing, it's taking our attention away from how we tell stories, how we create, amazing digital art. Because digital platforms can do things that we couldn't do 30 years ago.
That's very true.
It's amazing.
That's very true.
And that's where the attention needs to be, is in the creativity within the storytelling, which will then, I think, it won't be successful for everyone. It's always been that way.
Yeah.
But that's what will engage the audience.
Well, I certainly, for me, that wasn't something that I could have done by myself.
Yeah.
Because it's an audio-visual age now.
Yes.
And not every artist thinks audio-visually. It's probably maybe the younger generation because they've grown up in this extreme audiovisual age where, you were saying that, is it true? YouTube is actually the place where music's consumed.
It's the biggest platform, the biggest audience.
Right.
I think 2.7 billion users or something like that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
So it's interesting that people would kind of rather engage with a visual alongside the music, even if it's just lyrics or whatever, than just listening to, just having an audio experience.
Yeah.
And I think that does make the younger generation sort of much more at ease with making audio-visual content and thinking in that way. Probably not for everybody, but I do think that is quite a different skill.
Yes.
It's, it's enough being a musician. But then suddenly having to be an audio-visual musician, being able to translate this lovely music that you make into to work in an audiovisual medium, such as an Instagram or a YouTube. Yeah. There's a skill to that.
Yes.
And there's an art to that. And without collaborators, and at this point, I have to be so thankful for my creative director, Dan Canyon, and creative producer, Jack Prideaux. Without, I happen to have a team.
Yeah. You consciously
Chavez,
built
design.
a team.
I consciously found the team that would help make sense of my music and what's going on inside my head visually, and being able to translate that into photography. So Daniel was here as well, just to mention him. But yeah, I found this bespoke team with Dan at the helm, and I mean we spent hours and hours talking about visuals, me explaining the concept of the ordinary life of a magic woman, what it was that I was trying to say, some of my issues around just, even being on camera, all of my hang-ups and all of these things, and trying to figure out the way in which I wanted to tell this story. And it kind of, I pick up on you mentioning story quite a few times, and how that's actually very important to me as an artist. I'm a storyteller, and I'm interested in storytelling, and so thinking, okay, how do I present this narrative? What does it look like? What does it feel like? How do I make this really tangible? So that can potentially be tricky, a stumbling block for artists, particularly us musos. The more muso you are, where you're not thinking like that.
You don't think visually when you make music.
Interesting, because I'm wondering, does everyone think visually when they make music? Are they seeing things? I'm not sure necessarily that everybody does.
Yeah.
So I think those that can are definitely an advantage when it comes to
often I think it comes after as well. The visual, from conversations I've had with artists, the music is made, and then a sort of visual concept seems to materialize.
Emerge,
Perhaps there were some nucleuses within it, but it's certainly true in my experience that some artists are very, very adept, naturally have the visuals kind of exuding from them, and others have made fantastic music, full stop, and they need they want to release it, but there's nothing visual, and we're sort of like, okay, but we need, what's it going to look like?
And then,
even
what
a cover
happens to someone like that?
It can be hard, and I think this is what record labels in the past had fabulous creative teams and departments, and helped to, even in a pre kind of audiovisual, moving visual kind of world, and pre-digital. It would have been the product artwork. That was still often the domain of the record label to cultivate and to help, with the photo shoots or whatever it might have been. I think artists who are their own label, because it's very accessible to do that now, we've democratized the entrance to the market, which is excellent. But we're perhaps not always spelling out some of the challenges and the work involved in realizing the product, or how you undertake the visual storytelling that's going to be required of you on social media, and where the requests are going to come, to how you market your product. And I think that is a different skill set, and it's not for everyone.
Charles, it's a rude awakening. It's unbelievable. 10 years later, how different that is, and the responsibility that the artist has to tell the story, but also finding their way of doing that comfortably.
Yes,
because that's going to be different for everybody.
Finding your visual voice, your eye, is, and I think it's how you find enjoyment in the process, and expression in that process. It's work, it's a profession, it's a job, but it's conjuring all of that into something that feels representative of the work you want to put out into the world, that hopefully an audience is going to receive and want to share, and and that's where sort of success will come.
But you know what, I do think that that's not something that it feels like a discrete subject that artists, for those who don't want to just go beyond just music making and putting out, that have a more artistic ambition, it feels like a really important component of the job, that I feel like in coming back with solo work, I don't know if that I was really ready for that bit of the job.
Yeah.
And also understanding that it is my job.
Yes. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
What I saw when we first started talking and you began to explain the name of the album and some of the concepts behind it, and I think you'd probably already started working with Dan at this point, it was clearly rich in narrative. There was lyrically, and at first that's where you hear it and feel it, but then as the imagery came together, that there was clearly a depth that you could express through the record. And I think just going back to that sort of begging bowl perspective and the sort of noise of as you release music, focusing on asking people to listen to it or buy it, I think that can sometimes take the attention away from the thing which does require interpretation. I've made this music, I've written these songs. How do I now talk about them to the world?
Yeah.
And how do I sort of, explain? And in some ways, you don't want to over-explain a song. Sometimes you want to let people interpret the song. So there's a lot of consideration, I think, in terms of what you do want to say or don't actually want to say as you put it out there. But I think, the balance, from my perspective, it's more interesting if the conversation is balanced more around how you're trying to talk about the music and the choices that you're making there, whether they are actually just visual choices and how you're representing it visually, or literally words that you're putting behind a social post or wherever it may land. That's what's interesting to an audience, and if they engage with that or they find that engaging, they will know what to do next. I think
that's beautiful.
Right? I mean, we know, right? So
they know.
Yeah.
But trusting that is so funny because that's where I think artist anxiety has sort of flared up, in not trusting that the art's enough.
Yeah.
That they need the bowl as well.
Yeah.
And they need to kind of keep hitting it. Please put some, Yeah,
you don't need the bowl.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
You don't need it. Let's just get rid of it, y'all. Let's just get rid of the bowl.
Let's get rid of it. Yeah.
It would be so liberating that we, and it's also what I love about was it Anony that was a quote?
It was a quote,
of Anony speaking.
Of Anony, yeah.
Because, when I think of going back in the day, oh my gosh, what was on the corner of Piccadilly Circus? What was the big record shop there? Do you remember? Tower Records.
Yeah.
I spent hours in Tower, just, at the listening posts,
Yeah.
And I've bought 5 CDs. Maybe 3 of them I never listened to again. I wasn't angry about spending $12.99 on a CD of an artist and listening to it once.
Yeah.
I didn't get upset. I didn't feel ripped off even. It's funny. Do you remember ever feeling?
Oh yeah.
I need to take it back, or did you ever feel?
I mean, occasionally I'd go down. I'd go down Reckless Records and trade, so I could get some other new ones. I loved doing that.
Yeah, okay.
But no, I never felt. I remember feeling. I used to shop in record stores on Berwick Street.
Okay.
And you buy white labels, and so you'd be in the shop and there'd be a buzz around the record. You'd get it home and you'd be like, I don't know whether it's my sound system, it's just not dropping the way it did in the shop, or maybe I bought the wrong one. Those kind of feelings. But the excitement in that as you take it home and you take, it's just a different experience.
Totally.
And sometimes you learn to like something later. You go back to it and you're like, oh, okay, so it wasn't what I thought it was, but it's this. Or someone says to you, have you checked out the latest thing? You're like, yeah, I got it.
I bought it and it was just sitting there. And then only to rediscover it a few years later or whatever. But I guess, what I found really powerful from that quote that you read was that the exchange, the value of the song, and the experience of listening, the art of listening, all of that that was going on. I feel it's us as artists that need to bring that back.
Bring it back.
Like, okay, this is the value of my song, this is the value of my work, and this is the value of the exchange and this is the value of my art.
Yeah. And that's, I think that's where the artist industry can, lead the conversation and the sort of the approach to how we sell music, what we call the record business.
Right.
But if the record business is run by individual artists who are running their own artist businesses,
wow,
it's a very different looking business.
Wow. I love that.
So, that's what's super exciting, I think, and brings a lot of hope about this next chapter of the music industry. Because I think we're at a stage where streaming is mature. We're all very accustomed to how the streaming sort of ecosystem now works. There's nothing particularly new in that environment. It's kind of just accepted that, music will be available on streaming platforms, and that's how it goes. But what's the next 10 years? And are we going back, or hopefully we're going forwards, but into a different manifestation where, we can empower artists to shape what that's about? And I think you are a really powerful voice in doing that, and being interested to be the label and understand and ask the questions is essential to that process. So thank you for that.
Oh, wow. I'm interested in asking you from a distribution perspective how that looks, with a vinyl first. Does it impact your work as a distributor?
It economically, when we look at it from a business perspective, I think it's really positive. When we do a budget for an album that we're releasing, and if we're assuming we're releasing it on vinyl, you tend with physical format to expect to sell the majority of what you initially press in the first couple of months, where the sort of demand is there from the fan base. The record shops are most focused on new releasing generally, and then it drops quite fast. With streaming, it's more of a flat baseline. So you have a more recurring long-term kind of revenue stream. Okay. And it's obviously different for all different artists of different shapes and sizes. So in the independent space, putting out physical format is what helps a record recoup in the short term, because there's this higher value transaction happening between the sale of a record. Individual customer buying a record for £25-30 is obviously very different to them listening to it once on Spotify or another platform. So for me, it's a really positive way to focus the energy on how you make the business sustainable, how you make the record break even. And by making it break even, you're enabling the artist to continue to promote the song and promote the album and sort of be able to be sustainable and to earn a royalty. Right. But often the focus is if we're releasing digital and the album at the same time, we're very focused on all of the digital singles that are coming into the album release date, and that a lot of energy is expended on this and looking for playlists and looking at singles. And not to say that work isn't valid or isn't useful, doesn't have a value, but it can sometimes eclipse, in some cases, not all, the focus around the artifact, the product, which actually, going back to the visual side of things, it can be much richer experience, and actually is it is the fans who are willing to invest more, spend a bit more, want to hold an item. Those are the fans that we want to kind of cherish and look after. They're the ones who are really supporting. And it's not that we want to put a bigger bowl in front of them. What we want to do is give them something really awesome. Yeah, absolutely. And let them be the kind of tastemakers who can champion that and share it with their friends. And that's how it always used to be. Those people you used to know, like, oh, have you heard this record? Yeah. And you'd always discover something cool from them. So I think it's positive economically, and I think it helps shape the conversation in a way which takes a little bit of focus away from the endless chasing of playlists and streams. And that's not to take anything away from the economy of streaming. It has a lot of positivity, but it doesn't represent the music in and of itself. It's not where the story should start and end. So I think,
I couldn't agree more, because the story's way bigger than...
It's way bigger than the platform.
Way bigger than the platform. Way, way bigger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Well, to be continued, hopefully. Thank you.
Please don't wake me now.